Bloody Boris Johnson thinks he can control our lives. Oh, hello Simpsons fans and fellow YouTube viewers, and welcome to another season episode ranking video. Last time I did season 1, this time I shall be doing season 2. And remember, this is only my opinion, which is based on nobody else's. This season aired in 1990 and 1991, a year after season 1, and introduced a brand new change. In animation, that is. Many critics, fans and so forth pointed out how, rubbery the animation, especially in the characters, was in season 1. Only in the second season, the characters are standing and sitting in straight posture a lot. They had even made improvements on the buildings and sets, and the famous intro is even different. Originally they had Bart stealing a bus stop, causing the passengers to chase after their bus, but replaced it with Bart dodging the pedestrians. The intro would remain in the show for at least a couple of decades, which is a pity because it's way more subtle than the more modern intro. No disrespect, but I always found it funnier when Homer was successfully dodging Marge's car instead of being hit by it, creating one of them silly looking wall holes. But anyway, let's begin my ranking of season 2 from worst to best, starting with my least favourites. Number 22, Bart vs. Thanksgiving. This may sound controversial considering that most of the bad episodes rest within the modern era of The Simpsons, but Bart vs. Thanksgiving is to me what I can only describe as boring. This episode has been in many top 10 season 2 lists, and personally I can't understand why. Don't find it fun, don't find it funny, hell, not the slightest bit well written. By now we're used to seeing the occasional sibling rivalry between Bart and Lisa, and I understand that Bart wants to contribute to the preparations of the Thanksgiving party. Then it gets over the top when he destroys Lisa's mantelpiece. But the most awkward part is Bart's refusal to apologise for what he's done. His delivery of rebellion is so forced he even says it on national television, and I'm like, what? This is just as bad as the segment from Belle's Magical World where the two main characters bicker over who apologises first over some incident. Later, when Bart goes home and wonders whether he should or shouldn't go inside, and to be honest, I've seen better flash forwards on the show. This one is just his relatives chanting, "It's all your fault, it's all your fault." If that wasn't enough, we get the introduction of Marge's mom, Jackie, who I'm going to say I'm not a big fan of, which I'll discuss at another time. But even her role is uninteresting. You can watch Bart vs. Thanksgiving by all means, but I doubt you'll have missed anything if you don't. Number 21, Bart gets hit by a car. I'll start by talking about the episode's title. You can just about tell what's going to happen just by reading the title, and it's even displayed right before the main cue. It's exactly the kind of title producers would give to an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine. As for the episode itself, its narrative did confuse me as a kid. Bart gets hit by a car does make sense now. Guy responsible for Bart's injuries is of course Mr. Burns, and even though it was an accident, the family tries to sue him, but it still looks kinda dull. Okay, I do give credit that it's Lionel Hutz's first appearance, and he's definitely one of my favourite characters. This is also the first time we experience his rivalry with a blue-haired lawyer, which has always been a cool moment. However, I feel that Lionel had much better roles as the series progressed. We get a rather awkward moment when he and the family are preparing for the trial. As for the rest of the episode, there are scenes which are over with too quickly, i.e. when Bart thinks he's dead and ends up in the underworld. One other thing I don't like much is the final act, which Marge spoils the family's chances of being rich. There's more focus on her and Homer's relationship, and Homer being depressed and annoyed about their botched chances of earning the money, and less on Bart. I mean, have you noticed during the dinner table scene that he's quickly recovered from his injuries? So yeah, an episode that does lose its focus a bit and feels rather forced. I think there are better episodes from season 2 to watch. Number 20, Homer versus Lisa and the Eighth Commandment. Okay, that's the bad episodes out of the way. This one to me is pretty average. Homer purchases illegal cable TV for the family to enjoy, and Lisa gets paranoid about it following a lecture at Sunday school about the Ten Commandments, even screaming, "Thou shalt not steal," at Marge in a supermarket and in front of the other customers. Why is getting free cable such a terrible thing, Lisa? It's not like your dad murdered or sexually abused anybody. For somebody with an IQ of 159 to make such a huge fuss over an extremely mild crime. Anyway, Homer vs. Lisa in the Eighth Commandment does have some amusing moments, i.e. with Bart's cussing of the word hell, and when he shows his friends the rude TV channel, and when Homer puts his foot down, and when he tries to hide the illegal items from the police and Mr. Burns, and the last few seconds when he tries to cut the cable. Fortunately, Lisa's overreaction to the cable and the fairly dull moments surrounding it do ruin the chances of this episode being any higher on the list. And we know she's much better than that. Number 19, Bart's dog gets an F. The bits that really stand out about Bart's dog gets an F are when Bart tries hard to make Santa's little helper a better behaved dog, and it's especially during the finale where it understandably gets emotional because of the strong friendship those two have. The scenes with the obedient school are okay, as is the B plot where Lisa is ill with the mumps and learns from Marge how to sew. Of course, when the dog destroys their new blanket, it's the final straw for both the parents, and despite the children's understandable objections, they do plot to get rid of the dog. I must admit, though, it's a rather uncomfortable sight when we see Santa's little helper vandalising the household property, and I think they could have made him slightly more innocent rather than being deliberately destructive. Apart from that, not a lot to say about this episode, except that this was Frank Welker's debut performance on The Simpsons. Number 18, The Way We Was. And here we have the backstory where Homer and Marge met and made love for the very first time. I may not be a rom-com person, but I was always in favour of seeing an episode revealing the history of The Simpsons, and this is a good one. We see that much like Bart, Homer, along with his best friend Barney, was a troublemaker at school, and kind of like Lisa, Marge got involved in some political campaigns. These segments provide a great setup for their first meeting in detention. Another thing that stands out is Homer's rivalry with Artie Ziff, Marge's old boyfriend, who is smart but also kind of haughty. And need I mention the awkward debate they have? However, The Way We Was would have been higher on the list had it not been for a couple of cliches, yet some mild ones, i.e. Marge splitting up with Homer, which we've seen in so many rom-coms, and the prom scenes, which is seen in a lot of school/college movies. But it's The Simpsons, and we've known them for their film references. The episode does have a happy ending, with Homer and Marge reconciling, and once the flashback is over, this makes for one of the most hilarious scenes in classic Simpsons history, where the parents make out and all the children are touched, except Bart, who's strangling himself. Number 17, Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. I'm going to be honest, I didn't used to like Itchy and Scratchy and Marge that much. I know some people are going to be like, but it's so good. But hear me out. Although I now like this episode better than I used to, I remember as a kid wondering about the drastic change in the final act. The best thing about Itchy and Scratchy and Marge is its anti-censorship message. Yes, Maggie does get kind of influenced by the kids' favourite cartoon, that is Itchy and Scratchy, hence why she nearly kills Homer. Of course, it's just her being a little baby. This leads to Marge overreacting and organising a protest against cartoon violence, forcing Roger Myers Jr. and his fellow animators to make some changes. A lot of parents have had concerns over the content included in children's TV and films over the years, and many of them who have overreacted. I remember a few years ago when a mother complained about the screening of Watership Down one Easter afternoon on Channel 5 because of the violence the rabbits were committing, I bet there are some people complaining about Tom and Jerry, but it's actually mostly about something else other than its trademark violence. The result of Marge's paranoia leads to an episode of Itchy and Scratchy in which no violence occurs and they declare their love for each other, but the creepiest thing about it is their alien voices. There's even no conflict. If that happened in real life, I'd have switched off the TV before it even started, and understandably that's what Bart and Lisa do. And speaking about the final act, this is what turned me off about the episode in my younger years. Marge is persuaded to protest about something entirely different. The nude statue of David, which even exposes the genitalia. I think that was why my keenness in the episode was low, but I understand it more as an adult, and Marge learns from her mistakes. It's like, so violence on TV is bad, but nude sculptures aren't. As I said, the best thing about Itchy and Scratchy and Marge is the anti-censorship message, and it shows that not everybody is influenced by the arts and that every show/movie needs conflict to build things up. But I stand by when I say I like other episodes better. Number 16, Brush with Greatness. Not many people talk about this topic, but one fun fact about The Simpsons is that it has guest starred all the Beatles musicians except, of course, John Lennon, who died way before the show started. Brush with Greatness is the first episode to have a Beatle in it, this one being Ringo Starr, who, alas, is remembered, aside from being in the Beatles, only for his narration on the first 2 seasons of Thomas the Tank Engine, and not for his solo efforts. Nevertheless, his appearance on this episode made a great impression. His late response to Marge's letter is very memorable, and we even learn briefly of Marge's interest in British culture. And speaking of Marge, this is a great Marge-centered episode. We learn that she has had a talent in painting. When Homer finds the picture of Ringo in the attic, and he amusingly gets jealous over her hots for the guy. But it's just him being Homer. This also gets the attention of Mr. Burns, and he requests Marge to capture his inner beauty, which proves hard for Marge when he constantly behaves rudely towards her and her fellow family members. In the end, she does accomplish a picture of Burns, which turns out to be an awesomely terrifying nude picture of him. Extra points go to the design and structure of Mount Splashmore, and it makes me really want to go there. I, of course, am aware that it's fictional. Number 15, Dancing Homer. Dancing Homer was included on the On Your Mark, Get Set, Go VHS tape I got for Christmas when I was 10. Since seeing this episode for the first time, it has been a really entertaining one. It starts off with Homer moping in the bar following a trip to Capital City, and he tells his friends the full story, which began at one of his company's many outings at a baseball game, which Homer had achieved his fame after an embarrassing dance to Baby Elephant Walk, much to Mr. Burns' annoyance, and achieving supporters and a win for the Isotopes. This then leads to Homer's promotion to Capital City, which I have to admit the animators have designed really well. And of course we get that lovely song sung by Tony Bennett, and extra points for how they drew out the Capital City goofball. Not much to say about this episode apart from it being a nice fun one. Number 14. 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish. Another episode I had my opinion changed on as I'm matured. I guess when we're kids, we're not supposed to understand the adult political discussions that go on much. But it's a good episode nevertheless. This one begins with Bart and Lisa fishing at the stream near the power plant, only to catch a 3-eyed fish named Blinky, marking the first recurring appearance of the fish. This leads to the government forcing Mr. Burns a cash settlement. Mr. Burns' character gets much more of an establishment, and we do feel some sympathy when he's weeping in the car, knowing that the payment could cost him his plant. This changes when Homer suggests that he run for the governor, which appeals to his boss. We also get the start of Lisa's many grudges against him. Well, this one is a pretty calm one, when she reminds the family of how much pollution Burns has caused with the plant. Marge is also against the idea of Burns being a governor, and I've always loved the bit where she's dodging Homer's attempts to snuggle with her in bed. As a kid, it looks to me like he was nudging her out of bed. 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes in every fish is also the first episode since Krusty gets busted to have given one of the secondary characters a main storyline. Number 13, Old Money. Abe Simpson may not be one of the main characters, but he is Homer's father, and it makes sense that they give him a main role in a Season 2 episode, after many of the Season 1 episodes gave those roles to the main characters. In this episode, Grandpa begins a relationship with a fellow resident at his care home named Bee, but his chances to spend time with her on her birthday are ruined by Homer when he takes Grandpa on a disastrous family trip to the safari park. Next things he learns, Bee has died, and he takes his frustration out on Homer at the funeral. And I think this is the first instance on the show when we hear someone say, "I have no son." We do feel incredible sympathy for Grandpa because, well, try and imagine having a girlfriend who you vowed to spend some time with, but then some interferences scupper your last chances. That happened to me as well recently. Not that my girlfriend's dead, but since then, chances of getting cheered up were limited. Even Grandpa can't find much happiness without his bird. So instead, he is suggested by Lisa and even Bee's ghost that he invest Bee's fortune on happiness for other people. In the end, Grandpa does the most generous thing to his elderly friends, and it's good that he and Homer do make up. Number 12, The War of the Simpsons. We get another Homer vs. Marge conflict episode. Compared to Homer's Night Out, The War of the Simpsons is one that's done better. This time, Marge doesn't throw Homer out, she takes him to a marriage counselling meeting, and this time, nothing to do with a lap dancing photo, but Homer's irresponsible behaviour at a house party. He gets drunk and even ends up staring at Maud Flanders' boobs. And may I just say how wonderful and stylistic the animation is during Homer's flashback. The bit where Homer attempting to catch a giant catfish is both intense and funny. I even laughed during some of Bart's moments when he spells "boy, this party sucks" with the party food, and during his encounter with the babysitter. In the end, the kids get Grandpa to look after them, while Homer and Marge are away. I must admit, as amusing as Grandpa's phony crying is, it is rather over the top, and is it me, or did I see the Flanders couple at the counselling meeting? Number 11. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? We know Marge has a couple of older sisters, Patty and Selma. All we've known about Homer's side of the family was in relation to his dad, until Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where we learn that Homer has an older brother named Herb, who was born when Grandpa hooked up with a prostitute. This leads to Homer and the family tracking him down when Herb suggests that they should get together. I love how in his first scenes we don't see Herb's face during the call with Homer and that meeting he has with his peers, where he's like, "Mummy and Daddy didn't pay my way." By the way, I love his wild reaction to when his colleagues introduce the new car model known as Persephone. Then we see his face for the first time when the brothers finally meet. We also learn of Herb's rich lifestyle, and it's, of course, every kid's dream to be rich, or at least have rich relatives. It does go to Bart and Lisa's head, though this swimming pool quarrel is a little bit annoying. However, they do make me laugh with their pony ride and boat ride squabble. I think Herb would have made a great recurring character had it not been for the fact that his voice actor's a guest star, but Danny DeVito's done a great job. He's very attached to the family, and the way he approves of Bart's mischief is hilarious, and for some reason I do love that line, "Uncle sounds formal." He's also overly confident on Homer's progress with the car designs, and speaking of which, the car which is named the Homer I think the animators did a very good job on the design. Of course it's supposed to look poorly designed. I think we've known long enough that Homer watches way too much TV. And if I didn't know any better, by looking at that car, I'd say that Homer's TV watching history includes the Dukes of Hazzard and those Jerry Anderson shows. Of course, the episode does have a rather sad ending when the Homer stuns the audience and it turns out that it cost the company their entire economy. Going back to what I said about old money, Grandpa says, "I have no son." In this episode, Herb says, "I have no brother." Yep, doesn't exactly put a smile to our faces. How did Herb get on since then? I'll get there another time. Number 10. Blood Feud. Mr. Burns certainly makes an awesome villain for the show. Should the producers ever kill him off, that would probably mean the end of The Simpsons, which I think should be finished by now. Blood Feud sees Mr. Burns nearing close to death when his circulatory system goes wrong. We get a heartbreaking few comforting lines from Smithers, who has shown dedication to his work, but also of course is in love with Burns. Luckily, Bart saves him due to the correct blood type he has. At first I thought that was a short episode, but nope, there's more. Homer expects some expenses from Burns as a form of gratitude, but all they get is a thank you card. This leads to the hilarious next act in the episode. Homer's insulting letter to his boss, which he encourages Bart to write. And did I mention our first experience with Homer's voice going higher? It always makes me laugh when after Marge explains that to be rewarded is not always the case. Homer's like, "Marge, you're my wife and I love you very much, but you're living in a world of make-believe with flowers and bells and leprechauns and magic frogs with funny little hats. And gee, saying that to your boss smells like an elephant's butt indeed." The hilarity doesn't stop there, of course, when Homer and Bart go to the post office, when Homer pretends to be Mr. Burns in order to retrieve that letter, but that backfires when he admits not knowing Mr. Burns' first name. Smithers, despite siding with Burns, shows that he does have a kind heart and a vulnerable side when he begs for Burns to call off Homer's punishment. Eventually, Burns does get the family an expensive present, and I do love the ending where the family debate whether they've learned anything from the experience they've had. Number 9. Lisa's Substitute. Lisa's Substitute is a huge fan favourite, and it's not hard to see why. It's undoubtedly one of Lisa's best episodes, and in my opinion is a massive improvement compared to Moaning Lisa. Even though we heard her name on Bart the General and that we saw her towards the end of Brush with Greatness, we get a proper introduction to Lisa's teacher, Elizabeth Hoover, and I think this is the only time we've heard her being addressed by her first name. She's ill with Lyme disease, leading to a substitute teacher to take her place. Enter Mr. Bergstrom, voiced by Dustin Hoffman, whose teaching methods prove heavily inspiring to Lisa, and she views a perfect male role model within him. Homer's oblivious behaviour at the museum is amusing, but at the same time we do feel for Lisa, especially when this happens in front of Mr. Bergstrom. And we feel deeper sympathy for Lisa when she finds out that Mr. Bergstrom is moving out, and need I express the emotions from the train station bit, and that note he gives to her which says, "You are Lisa Simpson." The bit where Lisa takes her grief out on Homer is a little bit awkward when she says, "Baboon, baboon, baboon." But we can see where she's coming from. But I think I was more emotional when Homer eventually cheers Lisa up with his baboon antics, winning back her respect, and also cheers up Bart and Maggie. Apparently the writer John Vitti was pissed off with all these love stories the staff had and was worried about the comedy aspect, but being that it's a kid with a crush on a teacher, the worries got put aside, and I agree that they've achieved such an awesome episode. Oh, and did I mention the Graduate parody where Mrs. Krabappel seduces Bergstrom? Number 8. Simpson and Delilah. I have such awesome memories of this episode. It was featured on the Last Temptation of Homer VHS tape we got for Christmas when I was 8. and I've enjoyed it since then. Simpson and Delilah is particularly memorable as the episode where Homer grows new hair after putting on a substance known as demoxenil. And even though this is a parody of It's a Wonderful Life, it's a beautiful moment when we see Homer joyfully running down the streets, cheering and wishing the residents good morning. Hell, he even interrupts a funeral service, and they spare the few seconds to wish him good morning. Homer's new hairstyle does attract other people's attention, even Mr. Burns. Of course, in reality, employers have been known to make a fuss over one's appearance, even regarding what's on one's face and head. Burns does just that and gives Homer an executive role, much to Smithers' jealousy. And we see his immoral side when he finds Homer's illegal records on how he gains the hair in the first place. Carl, who becomes Homer's secretary, is a great character, and references to his homosexuality are very subtle compared to the gay jokes we had in recent years. Homer's obliviousness to that is also amusing, but we can get the feeling that Carl's gay. I guess the joke was that most secretaries to executives were women back in those days, and he was one of the applicants, and Homer hires him on Marge's suggestion. The reason I can tell of his sexuality is when he briefly kisses Homer on the lips and then pats him on the arse. Homer, of course, does eventually lose his hair, and the build up to that is well structured. Bart attempts to grow a beard with a substance, which we know won't work, but it's Bart being a kid. Going back to the appearance fuss, I do love Burns' reaction and Smithers' response to when they and the fellow executives see that Homer's lost his hair, and the executives don't take his presentation seriously as a result. But it's good that Burns lets Homer continue working in the power plant even though he's demoted back to his old position, and that he's kept respect from his family. Number 7. Bart the Daredevil. It's obviously impossible to talk about Bart the Daredevil without mentioning the bit with Homer's gorge jump on Bart's skateboard, and it's one of the definite reasons why it's made my top 10. I said before that The Simpsons ain't exactly an educational show, but I think viewers, including kids, can learn from this episode that copying stuff they see on the telly can be extremely dangerous. Bart is inspired to become a daredevil after the family sees the epic Truckosaurus performance and the equally epic motorcycle jump performed by Lance Murdoch. This leads to him attempting a stunt on his skateboard which puts him in hospital, followed by instructions from Dr. Hibbert, who we see for the very first time. And he points out how irresponsibly other patients have behaved as a result of what they've seen. But in the end, at first, one doesn't succeed, and Bart demonstrates so on his successful second try. But of course, most of us remember the finale when, after Homer stops Bart from jumping the gorge, he ends up doing that himself. True that falling down a cliff wouldn't be funny in real life, but the writers pull it off awesomely, and even the ambulance bit doesn't exactly cease the laughter. At the same time, we are grateful that Homer doesn't die, and it has an important message: don't try this sort of stuff at home. Number 6. Treehouse of Horror 1, that is. Yes, this is the episode that began a series of Halloween specials known as the Treehouse of Horror series. The first Treehouse of Horror episode I shall always have fond memories of watching for the first time when I was 7. It was what I once called The Simpsons in space. Yes, it's because that happens in the second segment, Hungry Are the Damned, and I did have a bit of an obsession with space at that time. In addition, the alien abduction has always cracked me up, thanks to when it's Homer's turn to be beamed up. Need I say the details? And speaking of the aliens, we get a great introduction to Kang and Kodos, who make awesome villains in the show. Of course, it does turn out eventually that they're just being over-friendly with the humans, with their various dinner servings. The other two segments are good to watch as well. First one is Bad Dream House, which always felt like an original and interesting idea to me. Family being taunted by a talking house, I've yet to come across something similar to that. The ending could have been darker, but oh well. But I'd say my favourite segment is the last one, which is the Simpsons version of the Raven. I think out of most Treehouse of Horror segments, this one goes the heaviest by the book. Only Bart, who plays the Raven himself, says, "Nevermore," in a taunting way. What links those segments well is through the children telling each other horror stories and debating whether them stories are scary or not, which still remains relevant in today's society. And it seems like a shame that most of the more recent ones don't link such segments with each other like that anymore. As for the Frankenstein-style introduction, I'm glad they had Marge as the one who warns the viewers about the episode's content, because, paranoid mother. Overall, I'd say Treehouse of Horror 1 is one of the best ones. Aside from the aliens, the talking house, and the Raven's narrator, the episode only features the 5 main characters. In addition, it has great visuals and colouring and storytelling. Even the kids will love this one if they like scary stuff. Number 5. Dead Pudding Society. The Real Jims once described Dead Pudding Society as an underrated episode, and I have to agree with him on that one. There are numerous things I love about this episode. One of them is Lisa's lessons to Bart on geometry, which even the viewers can learn from. I myself, when I'm playing golf or snooker or some target sport, always try to think geometrically. You could say that Dead Pudding Society contains some educational aspects, even though The Simpsons ain't exactly an education show, kind of like Merlin's teachings to King Arthur in The Sword in the Stone. But there's more to it than that. We have the rivalry between Homer and Flanders, and I think this is the first instance where Ned snaps and stands up to Homer. We learn that despite how cheerful he is most of the time, it doesn't mean that he can't lose his temper, and he does just that when Homer gets jealous and bitter about his fancy basement, and of course when the two argue about what they'll do if their sons win/lose. Speaking of which, I think this is Todd Flanders' best representation in Simpsons history. He shows how geometrically smart he is, though he puts it differently, quoting, "The trick is to play conservatively." It's a bit of a shame we don't see that much of a side of Todd in later episodes, because he and Rod could have had a bit more development. But of course, the build-up to Bart and Todd battling it out for the golf tournament final is great, and it makes for a hilarious ending for their fathers. Number 4. Principal Charming. A great episode to allow some of my favourite characters some establishment. They are Skinner, Patty, and Selma. Principal Charming also introduces another few of my favourites, including Groundskeeper Willie and Hans Moorman, even though their roles are quite small. In the end, we learn that Skinner is more than just an authority figure in the school as school principal. He also has a bit of authority in public places, so much that just about the whole town recognises him, even Mo. We also learn that he's single and does have an interest in starting a love relationship. But of course, his love for Patty goes so much to his mind that he neglects the school. As for the Bouvier twins, we learn that Selma wants to get married, but Patty ain't particularly interested in a relationship, but goes ahead with dating Skinner, and it's pretty much the only time I've ever seen Patty date anybody. As for Selma, we do feel sorry for her, and I can sort of relate to her, considering that I myself always did find it hard to find a girlfriend. Bit where she eventually dates Barney is amusing though. Many social media users have gone about what are considered the saddest moments in Simpsons history, and I'm surprised that hardly anybody's come up with Skinner and Patty's breakup scene. And I was in tears when they said their final goodbyes, followed by Skinner sobbing. Yes, it may be a loose parody of Gone with the Wind, but I was too tearful to notice that. But I do smile when he realises what's happened to the school. Oh, and extra points for Bart's pranks and Homer's Terminator-style hunts for boyfriends for Selma. Number 3. 3 Men and a Comic Book. This episode does demonstrate how the inability to share something could lead to some consequences. I bring this up even though I did point out what The Simpsons is and its balance on education. 3 Men and a Comic Book handles it well with some awesome storytelling. The three men in particular are Bart, Milhouse and Martin, and they use all their earnings to purchase a valuable comic book together. And this is where the conflict kicks in. Before I go on about that, Comic Book Guy has a great introduction, and I do love the evil laugh he gives when the boys leave the store. The conflict is awesome, and the confrontation between the three boys has a dramatic build-up. Obviously, while they're having a sleepover in Bart's treehouse, Homer and Marge don't notice their scrapes. Marge does worry about them considering the weather, but oh my god, Homer's response, "They're fine." That really cracks me up. The bits I like the best is during the finale when after Bart and Milhouse tie Martin up, their fight leads to Milhouse dangling out of the treehouse and Bart saving him, at the same time trying to save the comic. I think this is when we first see Milhouse's more vulnerable side, which we've adapted to as The Simpsons has gone on. Also, it shows how more important a human life is than a piece of reading material. We understand the boys' mourning over the comic and how they blame themselves for it. Delilah could have done with some alteration, but what the hell. We know that Bart and Milhouse were obvious choices as some of the three men, and I'm glad they had Martin completing the lineup rather than, say, Nelson. Had it been Nelson, he probably would have beaten the crap out of the other two. Number 2. Bart gets an F. I make no secret that I'm not basing this list on anybody else's opinions, but since I'd seen the Nostalgia Critics top 11 Simpsons episodes lists, I felt I had to rewatch Bart Gets an F. Now that I have, I can agree that this is an excellent episode, and therefore I'm ranking it higher than I would have done in my younger years. Obviously, we've been used to see Bart failing his exams and how wound up Mrs. Krabappel gets as a result of his progress. But Bart's progress with his revision and his school tests is what this episode digs much deeper into. I myself always got nervous when I took my GCSE and A-level exams, even though I did achieve some good grades. But the revision bits are what a lot of us can relate to. There are some amusing moments, i.e. when Bart persuades Otto to crash the school bus so that the exams can be delayed, and when Mrs. Krabappel says blah 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 in Bart's vision. Oh, and Homer seeing Dr. Pryor doing the same. But the biggest winner of the episode is the drama. Nothing has been said about the finale where Bart weeps over his exam failure that I can't agree with. It's such an emotional moment. In addition, no, it does have a happy ending where Bart does get lucky and cheers over the fact that he did eventually pass. Plenty to put a smile to your face. And number 1, one fish, two fish, blowfish, bluefish. If I know The Simpsons, the producers would never permanently split the titular family apart, and I'll state my reason for why I said it in the first place in a bit. We had one fish, two fish, blowfish, bluefish on the last Temptation of Homer VHS tape we got for Christmas when I was 8. My dad especially has always remembered the bit where Homer teaches Bart to shave. That scene is definitely funny, but also understandable considering that Homer has his quote-unquote last moments on Earth. I'm thankful that my parents still live, and I'd been pretty upset had any of them died during my youth. And when we see Homer receiving the news from Dr. Hibbert that he's about to succumb to the venom from the fish he's consumed, we get one of the saddest moments, yeah, we're always saying that, but come on, to have occurred on the show, and even Marge is sobbing. We do get some amusing moments when he plans to make the most of his quote-unquote last day, i.e. when he makes his video for Maggie, only to be botched by a call from Milhouse, and his last chance to hurl an insult at Mr. Burns, and some heartwarming moments when Homer spends some quality time with his dad. The drama is what makes me rank this episode so high, and I think I cried the most during the finale in a similar way to when I saw the endings of E.T., Pinocchio, The Wizard of Oz, Land Before Time, when Homer bids farewell to his children, and when Marge wakes up to find Homer motionless in the lounge chair. Every time I think about this scene, I try very hard to control my emotions, and I think this is one of the reasons why I like this one better than Bart Gets an F. In the end, we're relieved that Homer stayed alive, thanks to his warm drool, because I doubt the show would have continued if otherwise. Yes, there's the "he's alive" cliches, but quite frankly, that never pissed me off at all. Then, of course, we have the closing sequence in which Homer is eating potato chips in front of the telly, which for some reason annoyed my mum, but always made me smile. So that was my ranking of worst to best episodes of The Simpsons Season 2. My thoughts, I kinda like it better than Season 1. A few more episodes and more top-notch quality animation. No disrespect to Season 1, but my favourite season was yet to come. I'd say this was I'd say this one is as good as the season now we'll talk about next, season 3. Can't think of a favourite out of those two at the moment. But anyway, thanks for watching and join me next time when I rank season 3's worst to best episodes.